The Golden Compass was New Line Cinema's ambitious attempt to capitalize on the massive global success of the Lord of the Rings trilogy by launching another high-profile fantasy franchise based on Philip Pullman's acclaimed His Dark Materials novels. However, the studio rushed the production process, eager to quickly establish a new franchise without fully delving into or capturing the complex, multi-layered themes and philosophical depth that made Pullman's work so revered among fans and literary critics alike. This haste ultimately led to significant criticism for oversimplifying or outright omitting critical narrative elements, particularly the book's nuanced exploration of religion, spirituality, and morality, which were central to Pullman's storytelling and thematic intentions. Many fans and commentators felt that the film sanitized these provocative ideas to avoid controversy, thereby stripping the story of its intellectual and emotional resonance. Consequently, the film's box office returns were disappointing, falling well short of expectations and resulting in a loss of momentum for planned sequels that could have developed the story more fully and faithfully. The journey to bring His Dark Materials to the big screen began in earnest in 2002, when New Line officially acquired the rights to the trilogy, envisioning a 3-film series to rival the scale and success of The Lord of the Rings. In 2003, the studio hired acclaimed playwright Tom Stoppard to write a screenplay, raising hopes among fans that the adaptation would be faithful to the source material's core themes and narrative complexity. While several notable directors, including Brett Ratner and Sam Mendes, expressed interest in helming the film, the studio ultimately chose Chris Weitz, after he impressed executives with a fresh, visionary treatment of the screenplay. Drawing inspiration from both period dramas and grand space operas, Weitz began rewriting the script from scratch, aiming to blend historical authenticity with spectacular fantasy elements in a way that would honor the spirit of Pullman's world while making it accessible to mainstream audiences. Throughout the process, Weitz sought advice and mentorship from Peter Jackson, the director behind The Lord of the Rings, to better understand how to manage the logistical and creative challenges of a large-scale fantasy production. Despite these efforts, the film faced significant backlash from religious groups and advocacy organizations for downplaying or softening the book's controversial anti-religious themes, which sparked public controversy and created intense pressure on the filmmakers. This backlash contributed to Weitz stepping down temporarily as director amid the turmoil. Anand Tucker briefly stepped in to direct, but soon left the project due to creative differences, further delaying production. Ultimately, encouraged and supported by Pullman himself, who remained invested in seeing a faithful adaptation, Weitz returned to direct the film, solidifying the cast with fresh talent such as newcomer Dakota Blue Richards, who was cast as the protagonist Lyra Belacqua, and established star Nicole Kidman, who took on the role of Mrs. Coulter. Kidman accepted the part after receiving a personal letter from Pullman explaining the character's complexity and importance, which added a layer of prestige and authenticity to the project. Despite these promising elements and the creative team's best efforts, The Golden Compass ultimately failed to meet critical and commercial expectations, struggling to resonate with a broad audience and falling short of the success needed to secure future installments, leaving the franchise's potential unrealized and the adaptation widely regarded as a missed opportunity. New Line Cinema assembled an impressive ensemble cast for the film, featuring notable actors such as Ian McKellen, Ian McShane, Sam Elliott, Daniel Craig, Eva Green, Kathy Bates, and even Sir Christopher Lee, who contributed a brief but memorable line. Principal photography began in September 2006, with the majority of filming taking place in England, supplemented by location shoots in Switzerland and Norway. A significant portion of the production was conducted indoors at Shepperton Studios, as is common for films of this scale. The filming process spanned several months and incorporated over 2,000 special effects shots, which inevitably drove the budget to an enormous $180 million. When adjusted for inflation, this equates to approximately $260 to $280 million in 2024 dollars, not accounting for additional expenses such as marketing, distribution, and the share taken by theaters. Considering these extra costs, the movie would have needed to generate 2 to 3 times its production budget just to break even. Consequently, There was intense pressure leading up to the release to see if the film could perform well enough to justify sequels or at the very least recoup its hefty investment. Upon its debut on December 7, 2007, The Golden Compass opened at number 1 at the box office, with a $26 million opening weekend. However, domestic earnings in the U.S. were underwhelming, totaling only $70 million, far short of the break-even point. In contrast, international markets yielded a much stronger performance, with $302 million globally, bringing the worldwide total to $372 million. Despite the robust international box office, the film's disappointing domestic turnout had significant negative repercussions for New Line Cinema, a topic we will examine in more detail shortly. Turning to critical reception, the film received mixed to negative reviews, holding a 42% critic score and a 51% audience rating on Rotten Tomatoes. The critical consensus described the movie as relying heavily on impressive visuals to compensate for a lackluster and diluted storyline, particularly due to the removal of the more controversial elements present in the original source material. Other review platforms reflected similar sentiments, with The Golden Compass earning a 6.1 out of 10 on IMDb, a 51% score on Metacritic, and a 2.6 out of 5 rating on Letterboxd. Despite the lukewarm reception, the film did achieve recognition at the Academy Awards, winning the Oscar for Best Achievement in Visual Effects in 2008, a surprising victory over the favored Transformers, and securing a nomination for Best Achievement in Art Direction, though it did not win in that category. These accolades were insufficient to shake the overall perception that the film was a disappointment among critics, fans, and general audiences alike. So what happened to the franchise after the film's release, and what factors contributed to its failure? The Golden Compass failed to launch the anticipated film trilogy, and its underperformance was a contributing factor in New Line Cinema's eventual merger with Warner Bros. Although the film grossed $302 million internationally, New Line did not benefit financially from this figure, because they had sold the overseas distribution rights prior to release in order to finance the production budget. As a result, the studio incurred greater losses than the box office numbers would suggest. Additionally, the film's reputation and box office performance were negatively impacted by a boycott led by various religious organizations. This backlash was partly due to the filmmaker's decision to tone down some of the series' anti-theocratic themes central to the books, where the Catholic Church, or more broadly the authority, serves as the main antagonist, a controversial element that the film largely softened to avoid alienating audiences. This choice, while perhaps intended to broaden the film's appeal, arguably diluted the story's core conflict and contributed to its mixed reception and commercial struggles. Many people describe His Dark Materials as the opposite of the Chronicles of Narnia, which is famously known for its strong pro-religious themes and clear Christian allegories that portray a stark moral dichotomy and a divine order reflecting traditional values. This contrast immediately drew significant attention from various religious groups who perceived Philip Pullman's work as controversial and antagonistic to their deeply held beliefs. Unlike Narnia's endorsement of faith and divine authority, Pullman's narrative actively challenges orthodox doctrines, promoting skepticism, secularism, and a sharp criticism of authoritarian religion, which many conservative religious audiences found provocative and unsettling. During the film's production, New Line Cinema faced a complex dilemma: whether to dilute these controversial themes to secure wider audience appeal and avoid alienating religious viewers, or to embrace the original material's intellectual depth and thematic boldness to satisfy the loyal fans of the books. Ultimately, the studio opted for a cautious middle ground, softening the content sufficiently to minimize controversy, while attempting to retain the core story to attract existing fans. However, despite these efforts, religious groups still organized boycotts of both the film and the original books, generating a wave of negative publicity in the lead-up to the film's release that overshadowed marketing campaigns and complicated its reception. New Line estimated that this backlash cost the film nearly half of its potential box office revenue, though this figure remains debated among industry analysts and fans. Moreover, the decision to tone down the core themes of Pullman's work alienated many loyal readers who had hoped for a faithful and unapologetic adaptation, thus undermining the film's financial prospects. Key changes made to the film included a significant rearrangement of the plot structure and the controversial cutting of the original ending. Decisions that disappointed fans seeking a true-to-source narrative. Director Chris Weitz later revealed that he frequently clashed with the studio over how to balance faithfulness to the novels with commercial interests, highlighting the tension between artistic vision and market demands. New Line ultimately took control during post-production, making extensive cuts, reordering scenes, and forcing costly reshoots to restore narrative coherence. This intervention resulted in a disjointed film that lacked the original's narrative flow and emotional depth, leaving many viewers confused or underwhelmed. The abrupt ending was a direct consequence of cutting the filmed finale, which has since become available on YouTube, providing a glimpse of what was lost in the editing room. Much of Pullman's intricate world-building, which is central to the novel's appeal, was sacrificed in the process, leaving behind only a minimal, stripped-down plot. This kind of simplification and reduction of complex fantasy worlds is a common pattern in major studio adaptations, as also seen with films like Aragon, where vital elements are cut despite their essential role in creating depth, uniqueness, and immersive storytelling. The removal of these elements often results in shallow, fragmented films that feel disconnected from the spirit and richness of the original source material, ultimately disappointing both longtime fans and critics alike. This phenomenon raises broader questions about the challenges of adapting rich literary works for mainstream cinema, where commercial pressures frequently clash with the demands of faithful storytelling, a tension that continues to shape the reception of fantasy adaptations today. It's quite strange that New Line showed enough confidence in the property to invest a massive $180 million, yet simultaneously hesitated to deliver a faithful adaptation. Dominic Noble highlights in his video that many of the changes stemmed from New Line's desire to position this series as a sort of Lord of the Rings Part 2. This resulted in rearranged plot points to ensure the major battle occurred at the story's climax, adhering to a more conventional movie narrative. Additionally, this is why the studio decided to remove the original ending and defer it to a sequel that, of course, never materialized. I believe they were also reluctant to commit to the original ending because it concludes on a notably dark note. Somewhere out there, I'm convinced there exists a faithful and well-crafted version of this film, but we might never see it due to the extensive content left on the cutting room floor. Another conflict between the director and the studio arose over the character of Iorek Byrnison, the Armored Bear. The director Weitz had initially cast Nonso Anozie, but New Line overrode this choice and recast the role with Sir Ian McKellen. While this recasting was unfortunate, as Weitz mentioned in a Newsweek article, if you're going to have anyone recast in your movie, you're happy it's Ian McKellen. This again reflects New Line's tendency to overly emulate The Lord of the Rings. Although the 2007 film didn't spawn any sequels, the books found new life through the BBC and HBO series His Dark Materials, which adapted all 3 novels across 3 seasons. This adaptation was far more faithful to the source material and received a better critical response. I should preface by saying I haven't read His Dark Materials, so I'm approaching this film as an average moviegoer. As such, I have to admit the movie wasn't as bad as I expected. Based on the reviews, I anticipated it would be much worse, but I found it just okay. Not good, but passable. Before diving into the negatives, I want to highlight what I liked about the film. The art direction was outstanding. From the sets and costumes to the overall production design, the filmmakers clearly went the extra mile to create a distinct and immersive fantasy world. There are numerous intricate details and bits of world building conveyed through the art design that made watching the film thoroughly enjoyable. The special effects also hold up well for a 2007 release. The $180 million budget is evident, particularly in the convincing portrayal of the ice bears, rare for CGI creatures with fur. The entire fight scene between Iorek and the usurper Bear King was not only badass, but surprisingly brutal for a PG-13 film. There's a lot of solid action throughout, which suffers from the same poor lighting issues that the long night episode of Game of Thrones was criticized for. Beyond that, I genuinely enjoyed the film's action sequences. When it comes to performances, I'm torn. On one hand, there are some excellent performances from actors like Sam Elliott, Nicole Kidman, and Sir Ian McKellen. On the other hand, some performances, especially from the child actors and Eva Green, fall flat. I don't blame the actors so much as the director, since many scenes involving Eva Green seem to lack clear direction, making her character's motivations feel unclear and muddled. Another aspect of the film that I both appreciated and disliked was the world building. The world building that remained in the final cut was my favorite part of the movie, but the portions that the studio excised are a significant issue and detract from the overall experience. In an effort to keep the film under 2 hours, many characters' backstories and relationships were heavily condensed or omitted, resulting in a rushed and underdeveloped narrative that left many viewers feeling disconnected from the story and its emotional stakes. For example, Lee Scoresby, a richly textured and charismatic character in the books, who brings warmth, humor, and depth to the story, lacks almost any meaningful background or clear motivation in the film adaptation, which feels like a missed opportunity given Sam Elliott's strong and nuanced performance. His portrayal hints at a more complex figure, but the screenplay and editing fail to provide the necessary context to fully engage the audience with his journey or his significance to Lyra's quest. This lack of detail extends beyond individual characters to the broader world building, especially with the main antagonist, the Authority, an institution formerly known as the Catholic Church in the novels, whose vague and underexplained motivations reduce them to a generic villain archetype, glossing over the rich tapestry of political intrigue, religious dogma, and philosophical conflict that forms the central thematic backbone of the original book, thereby stripping much of the story's depth and resonance. Ian McShane's armored bear, Iorek Byrnison, a majestic and fiercely proud warrior with a compelling personal history and a deep culturally rich ice bear society, also suffers from the film's narrative truncation. His character arc and the ice bear's intricate customs feel more like a side plot or an afterthought, rather than an integral and vividly depicted part of the story's fabric. A direct consequence of the film's heavy recutting and prioritization of brevity over depth. Fantasy films, particularly those adapting complex novels, typically require ample screen time to establish their immersive worlds, elaborate on their mythologies, and develop their characters in ways that allow audiences to become fully invested. Unfortunately, this film's disjointed scenes, awkward transitions, and sudden unexplained plot developments, such as the puzzling kidnappings and nonsensical justifications for critical events, disrupt the narrative flow and hinder emotional engagement, leaving the story feeling fragmented and incomplete. Additionally, the removal of the original ending, which presumably contained more resolution and setup for future installments, leaves numerous character arcs and storylines unresolved, contributing to the film's overall abrupt and incomplete feel, frustrating viewers who hoped for a satisfying conclusion, and leaving many questions unanswered about the characters' futures and the fate of the world they inhabit. Despite these significant flaws and missed opportunities, the film does offer some redeeming qualities, including impressive art direction that brings the fantastical elements to life with vivid detail, strong performances from the cast that attempt to elevate the material, imaginative visual effects that create a believable and enchanting world, and a core story with potential that still manages to convey some of the novel's adventurous spirit and thematic concerns. Ultimately, The Golden Compass serves as a cautionary example of how excessive studio interference, combined with strict runtime limits and a reluctance to embrace the complexity of the source material, can severely hinder a film's ability to tell a compelling, coherent, and emotionally resonant story, leaving audiences with a product that feels more like a truncated highlight reel than a fully realized adaptation. There may have been a good and faithful version of this film originally, but after being heavily recut, rearranged, and compressed, what we are left with is a Frankenstein-like movie that barely holds together narratively as it drags toward the finish. It's no surprise that the strongest part of the film is its first act, since that is likely the section least affected by the studio's heavy-handed edits. Furthermore, the studio's decision to avoid any controversial elements from the novels only intensified the backlash and negatively impacted the box office performance. It's truly baffling that New Line Cinema invested $180 million into this project, yet simultaneously seemed too afraid to produce an adaptation that stayed true to the source material. What do you think about The Golden Compass? Have you seen the film or read the books? How do you feel the two compare? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.